Hey everyone, we are going to continue our discussion of the New Deal program and Roosevelt's attempt to help Americans recover by providing relief efforts as well as providing reforms to prevent the Depression from happening again. So we're going to start by talking about programs he put in place to help the industry and labor sectors of the economy. So we're talking more urban areas. In our next slide, we're going to talk about what's happening in rural areas, especially on farms. So to start, Roosevelt puts in place the NRA. That's not the National Rifle Association. It's the National Recovery Administration. He does it through executive order, doesn't go through Congress to do it. It's a very complex New Deal organization. The National Recovery Administration combined immediate relief as with long range reform. So you're having two of those R's that we've been talking about in one program. The idea was to help industry, labor, and the unemployed. So let's start by talking about what happened with industry. So some of the benefits to industry were that they could work out codes of fair competition under which hours of labor would be reduced so that employment could be spread out over more people. So if you're not employing people for as many hours in a day, say you employ them for 8 hours a day rather than 12, then you have to employ more people to get the amount of work done in less time. Or if you're running your factory around the clock and you have two 12-hour shifts, now you're going to three 8-hour shifts. So you're having to hire a third group of people. You're having to hire a third group of people to meet that demand. In addition, the NRA set a ceiling for maximum hours of labor. Same idea, not working as many hours, get more people to work. And they have minimum wage being established. So you see minimum wage really coming in with the National Recovery Administration. Some of the benefits to labor, to the employees, were that they now have the right to choose which union they want to join for organizing and bargaining power. They don't have to use who the company says they should use. And it forbids yellow dog contracts. So those contracts that industry was requiring them to sign to join specific unions or not join unions. And then child labor is restricted. We talked a little about that last class as well. The symbol of the NRA, which you can see in the picture, is the blue eagle. The slogan is "We do our part." And basically our businesses would have this symbol and slogan in the window of their shop or their factory or whatever to show that they were patriotic and that they're supporting the effort to get the country back to work. There were problems, however. There's too much self-sacrifice expected. They're expecting people to work less, potentially make less money. They're expecting labor to increase the amount of money that they're paying people, hire more people. So it's really expecting a lot in a short amount of time, making a lot of reforms in a short amount of time. So what ended up happening was that you would get what were called chiselers. These are people who put this Blue Eagle logo and the slogan in their shop window, but they violate the codes. They say that they're doing it, but they really aren't. So they're taking advantage of the public and making people think that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing when they're not. In 1935, the Supreme Court ends NRA, the National Recovery Administration, declaring that Congress can't give legislative powers to the president, that the NRA is something that Congress should have passed. It was not something it can give the president permission to enact on his own through executive order, in part because this dealt with interstate commerce, so trade between states. And Congress, under the Constitution, is the only branch of government, the only part of government that can regulate trade between states, regulate interstate commerce. And so you can't really, if it's between states, then Congress has to regulate it. If it's just a local business, then the Supreme Court said Congress doesn't have the ability to regulate them at all, and neither does the president, because they're not, it's just in the state. Only states can do that, not the federal government. So NRA ends, it's short-lived. However, some of the ideas, minimum wage, less maximum hours of labor, those things are still in effect today. So you do see some of those reform efforts carrying over. Another program that is established is the PWA, the Public Works Administration. And this is where they start doing work on public buildings, highways, and parkways, putting people back to work, doing those kinds of projects. The biggest achievement, and you see it pictured here, was the Grand Coulee Dam on the Columbia River in the Northwest. Provided electricity and irrigation to the Pacific Northwest. One of the real successes of the New Deal through the PWA, and we're going to see later with the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority, is that they really step up the amount of people who have access to electricity and also running water. And so that is a huge success. Not only is it putting people back to work, but it is helping to make the country better for the long term. You're going to see changes happening in the liquor industry. Prohibition is going to be on its way out by the time Roosevelt comes into office in 1932. And that is going to be a good thing for wages, for people going back to work. People are able to go back to work in distilleries. If you look at Kentucky, a lot of people were put out of work when bourbon distilleries had to shut down. Now they can go back to work. You get more revenue generated. During the first 100 days, Congress legalized light wine and beer, so with lower alcohol content. But in doing that, they also put a tax on it. Every barrel of wine, every cask of beer has a tax, and this allows Congress to raise revenues to help fund these other projects. The 21st Amendment is passed officially in late 1933, and it officially ends prohibition. There is no more prohibition. So I'm going to show you this clip from a 1933 newsreel celebrating the end of prohibition. You are going to have to respond to this clip, on your quiz.
Here's the big moment. Acting Secretary of State William Phillips is signing the 21st Amendment, and prohibition is repealed. There it is, official and everything. You can see for yourself. And now for some action. Thousands of cases of liquor have been waiting in warehouses for this moment, and the rush is on to load up and deliver the goods to hotels, restaurants, and liquor stores in every direction. Meanwhile, thousands of cases of fine wines and spirits are coming right off the boat, and this time it's the real stuff, Europe's best. In Times Square, jubilant crowds are gathering to celebrate, and you can't blame them. Just think, 14 years. Here at Park Lane, they've opened a round-the-world bar. You order a drink from any part of the world and get it right on the spot. The demand for fine and expensive liquors is so great that hotel wine cellars, which have weathered the dry era, are rapidly depleted. Here in Chicago, the Congress Bar presents a scene that beggars description. It's like an armistice celebration after a long and devastating war. Similar scenes are being enacted at the Palmer House. It's one grand and glorious party everywhere you look. The bartenders are certainly doing their stuff tonight. And how? Whoopee! There'll be a lot of hangovers tomorrow. But tonight's the big blow-off. Everybody's celebrating. It's the biggest night in the history of Prohibition. This only happens once in 14 years. Whoopee! Let's have another. Boy, oh boy, oh boy.
Okay, so that's kind of humorous, obviously, but it it's from the period. It's primary source. It is how people were celebrating. They were excited about the fact that prohibition is over. They're actually able to distill liquor, wine, beer legally now instead of bathtub gin or moonshining, the things that we saw during prohibition. And it generates more revenue for everybody, for employees who are back to work, for the government who's raising tax money in general. So now let's turn to what's happening with farmers. Okay, farmers' plight. Things aren't going so well if you're a farmer, especially in the Midwest. So the first program that gets passed is the AAA, the Agricultural Adjustment Administration. The goal of this was to establish parity prices for basic commodities, basic farm goods, that would set the price of a product to the same real value and purchasing power it had enjoyed um, before World War One. Because what had happened is that farm prices had gone way up during World War One because of worldwide demand, especially in Europe, which was destroyed and needed stuff from the U.S. Demand had gone way up in World War One, so prices had gone way up. So the idea was to get us back to pre-war prices, and that's what parity is. It tries to get you um, it's more like fairness. It's trying to get everything sort of equal, sort of similar. Um, so the idea of this was to get it back to how it had been before World War One. So basically, the AAA basically pays farmers to reduce their crop acreage. So they're plowing through their cornfields or their wheat fields. They're slaughtering some of their animals. Um, to pay for that, to pay people not to farm, they're basically taxing processors of farm products. So maybe a meat packing industry or a grain mill or something like that. And then those companies would pass that tax on to consumers. So prices are going in the right direction because there's less supply is decreasing. So you're getting back to where you need to be. The Dust Bowl, in the same time period, a 9-year drought affects the Great Plains. And you can see on the map there the main states that are affected. There's 5 main states. Colorado, New Mexico, Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas are affected the worst by this drought. Farmers are plowing and plowing and plowing and plowing the topsoil. It's basically becoming super loose and turning to dust. There's no water to pack it down. Wind is going to roll through the plains. Topsoil is going to be picked up and blown away, causing the dust storms. At their worst, these storms are called black blizzards. And you can see pictures of what they look like. The bottom 2 pictures show the cloud. It looks like storm clouds moving through, but that's dust. And then in the top picture, you can see how everything is covered in dirt. Basically, it's buried. The plains are buried in dirt. You can see wagon wheels sticking up, fence posts, things like that. People would have to dig out their houses as if it was a snowstorm. The worst of the storms happened in 1935, and that day in 1935 was known as Black Sunday. Winds could gust as high as 60 to 70 miles per hour on that day. The sustained winds were 30 to 40 miles per hour. We're going to watch a Today in Weather History video. It's short. It's kind of hokey, like the weatherman. He's your typical kind of hokey meteorologist. However, the pictures are interesting and the information is really good. Again, I do want you to respond to this on your quiz, so watch it. Maybe. All right, it doesn't look like this video is going to play for us. I will show it to you in class before we take the quiz, but it just gives you a good idea of what it looked like. And you can see there's a close-up picture right there, the first frame of the video that really shows you what was happening. All right, so people would get dust pneumonia. They basically get dust in their lungs and they wouldn't be able to breathe. The very young and the very old would die because of that dust, because they just didn't have the immune system, the stamina to get better from it. People who were strong enough would cough up clods of dirt. So think about coughing and coughing up clods of dirt. They were basically like pencil size, just dirt coming out of your mouth as you coughed. It's kind of gross and amazing. Another thing that was happening at this time period were thousands and thousands of jackrabbits coming down from the hills because they were starving, because nothing's growing. And anything that people had managed to plant, the jackrabbits were eating and destroying. So we're going to watch a video about this next class. But people would basically go out on Sunday afternoon and try to round up jackrabbits into pens, like you would round up cattle into a pen, and then they would club them to death to try to prevent whatever they were able to grow from being destroyed. What's also happening at the same time is mechanization. You've got machines doing a lot more work, more land is getting farmed. So as the levels of machine technology is increasing, farmers are continuing and continuing and continuing to plow more and more land each year, hoping that the rains return and they'll be able to start planting again. It's a vicious cycle in this drought. It just means there's going to be more dust. The other issue with mechanization is that sharecropping and tenant farming is going to fall off because they don't need those workers anymore. They're having machines to replace those workers. So if you think about the fact that African Americans suffer unemployment rates in the Great Depression twice that of whites, a lot of that has to do with the fact that they were relying on sharecropping and tenant farming. Groups of people would leave the plains of Oklahoma and Arkansas and move west to California, and they became called Okies and Arkies because they were mainly from Oklahoma and Arkansas. They had heard things were better in California. They thought that if they left, it couldn't be worse. So they're selling everything they can, loading what they can on trucks. You can see this in the bottom picture. And they're heading west on Route 66. And you can see that dotted line on the map. That is Route 66. It's a popular tourist route even today. It was not a pleasure trip. Going across the deserts, temperatures might reach triple digits during the day, near freezing at night. They don't have anywhere to stay. Some of them are sleeping under their cars. Some of them are sleeping in their cars. Some of them are just sleeping on ditches on the side of the road. We're going to watch a video showing ideas of that, pictures of that next class as well. Trip could be deadly if you break down in the middle of the desert. You don't have water. You could die. When they arrived in California, they were treated as second-class citizens. They are not wanted. There were signs put up basically trying to segregate these migrants from the population of California that was already there. John Steinbeck's famous novel, The Grapes of Wrath, tells the story of the Joad family, who were Okies. They leave Oklahoma to try to go to California. They experience death, depression, issues along the way. So if you're interested in reading, it might be a good one to read about this time period. All right, that concludes the lecture for this for these slides. You will have a quiz next class. So if you need to go back and listen to anything, you can use whatever notes you take. I will see you soon.